Okay, welcome back. This is our final panel, Journalism Pedagogy. How do we teach this stuff? And so my colleague Caroline O'Neill from Carleton, who teaches in our Bachelor of Media Production and Design program, is chairing this panel. She's going to introduce the participants. And just a reminder, after this session, we're just going to go straight into a sort of final brainstorming idea generation session. And when we run out of ideas, we will go next door for some food and drinks to end off the day. So, Caroline, over.
Thank you so much, Alan. As Alan said, I am faculty with the Bachelor of Media Production and Design, which is housed within Carleton's School of Journalism. Before joining the fine folks at Carleton, I was a producer on CTV's Power Play, so I certainly know a thing or two about working on a small but mighty team and doing the most with the resources that we have. The conversations we've been having today, I think, are definitely a call to action to newsrooms, but they impact lots of other people as well. And really, they impact the people tasked with teaching the next generation of emerging reporters. So classrooms are powerful and special places. They are places where we can give people the freedom and the creativity and the safety to really try these tools. But how do we do it effectively? So when should we be introducing AI? How do we teach AI, period? And how do we balance that fine act of the creativity and the possibility and the opportunities that we spoke about earlier today when AI is also a threat to academic integrity? So no pressure for the three here. That's a lot to dig into. But we are so lucky to be joined by three people who do teach AI to journalism students. So right here we have Jeremy Caplan. He is the Director of Teaching and Learning at the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism at City University of New York. Jeremy also pens a fabulous newsletter called Wonder Tools. I highly suggest you subscribe. And he helps subscribers use tools for creative productivity. So again, very in line with the conversations we've been having all day today. We have Dr. Mario Garcia. He is a senior advisor on news design and an adjunct professor at the Columbia Journalism School. He's also the CEO and founder of Garcia Media, a global consulting firm. And I highly suggest that you give Mario's most recent book a read, AI, The Next Revolution in Content Creation. And Florent Daudens, who we are all familiar with, but in addition to everything that he does with Hugging Face, in addition to his previous work with Radio-Canada, he also teaches digital journalism at the Université de Montréal. So each of our panelists are going to be speaking for 10 minutes, and they are specifically going to be focusing on how they bring AI into their respective classrooms. And we are going to hear from Jeremy first.
Thanks, Caroline. Thanks, everyone. I know it's been a long day. I hope this is a session, it's a little different from some of the others because we're really focusing on the next generation. Most of you will forget most of what I'm going to say, and most students that we teach will forget most of what we teach them as students. What they may not forget as much is the mindset that we leave them with, or that we inspire in them, or that we try to nudge them towards. And what I'd like to share in the next few minutes is how I think that should be really directed towards what I consider to be skeptical curiosity, which is the mindset that I think we need them to have and to embody as journalists. To take us back to the beginning of Nikita's session, exploring what we can see in AI. I'm curious if people know instinctively which of these is human-generated as opposed to AI-generated. You can think to yourself, I won't publicly embarrass anyone for raising their hand at the wrong letter, but think for yourself for a moment if you know which one of these. And I'll just ask you a different question to raise your hand if you feel 100% confident that you know exactly which image is human-generated. You could raise your hand for that if you have the confidence to do so. And so what I would propose is that even though we do kind of have a sense that we can distinguish what's AI generated and what's not, it's increasingly more and more difficult. A is the human generated one, just as an FYI. So if you look at these terms, this kind of represents a little bit of a mini tour through the history of recent journalism technology, right? And there's something that I think has been a common trend, I guess you could say, common characteristic of many journalists, not all journalists, but certainly many journalists over the years in response to these, right? And that's a certain kind of mindset. And that's a mindset I consider to be kind of a pessimistic resistance. Right? We don't need this, we don't want this, this is problematic, this is too costly, this is going to take my job. There's a whole range of different kind of complaints or concerns, some of which are somewhat valid in certain circumstances, but many of which are probably unnecessarily pessimistic or unnecessarily resistant. And I think it comes in each of these generations of technology, right? It's not something that's new. It's not something that's specific to AI or really any specific technology. It's something that's carried through the long tradition of technology that we've used for journalism and for writing and for media. And on the other hand, there's another kind of characteristic that some of us take or have taken in the media industry, particularly in the tech journalism realm, where we've had a kind of gullible faith in the silver bullet solutions. And these are some of the silver bullet solutions that I'm referring to specifically. And each and every one of these seem to hold so much promise, right? In fact, the iPad one, if you remember Steve Jobs on the stage with the News Corp team, talking about how this was going to change magazines, right? There's a whole iPad store for magazines. A lot of news organizations shifted, direction, had hired entire teams of people to create iPad magazines and so forth and so on. And in each and every case, the New York Times, the virtual reality, not to pick on the New York Times, which I love, but shipped 1 million, VR headsets to readers and invested quite a lot of effort into its VR projects. Again, not to say these aren't of value. I think each of these technologies has a value and it's interesting. It can be used for good journalism in some cases, but none of them are silver bullet solutions. And all of them carry some challenges and some limitations and some nuance and some complexity, as does AI. And so I think, again, in terms of what we want to inculcate in terms of what we're teaching, it's this approach that's somewhere in the middle of these two polar extremes of kind of pessimistic resistance and gullible faith, is this curious skepticism. And the way we do that is what I want to share next, which is really seeing AI as a tool, as a resource, just like a lot of the other tools we use in journalism, which is what we're teaching students about. We're teaching them about frameworks that are tools, approaches that are tools, the importance of the eternal verities of journalism, of reporting and writing and photography and all the other things we teach, and also the value of digital tools in addition to frameworks. I find AI relevant in personal ways, in professional ways, in teaching ways. If we have more time, I'll go into this in more detail, but I find it to be a useful tool for the work that I do regularly. And for the journalists that I work with in the entrepreneurial journalism program, where we help journalists around the world in 100 days build, develop, or grow their newsletters, podcasts, niche sites, et cetera, each of them has something in common, which is that they're limited in terms of their time, their bandwidth, their money, their skill, et cetera. And so they need a variety of different tools. AI is just one of those. But we need to teach them how to incorporate the best of those tools, to do so ethically and efficiently and creatively, so they can do the best work that they can do, right? It's in service of the work that they're trying to do. So what do we actually need to teach? I think there are basically 4 things to start out with, right? It's a huge subject matter, just like a lot of the subjects that we teach in journalism. But just to start out with, what's the rhetoric? What are the kind of ways in which people are seeing this, right? What's happening in the world around this? What are people saying on all these different fronts? So you understand the context in which we're operating. Then the examples, right? We've been hearing about examples all day today, so I won't repeat all of those ways in which we're using, journalists are using AI, right? Starting from Nikita's 20 examples this morning, et cetera. You've heard a lot throughout the day, so I won't repeat those, including from the panel after lunch. Then the action is really, okay, now we're going to actually put our hands into this, right? I'm not a big fan of abstract theoretical teaching. There's some value to frameworks and ideas and certainly understanding history and so forth, but we actually have to use things to understand them, and you learn by doing, right? That's what learning science has taught us over the last couple of decades, right? You don't learn by sitting back and listening to a lecture. You learn by putting your hands into something and doing something, making something, building something, creating something, annotating something, right? Responding, critiquing something. So that's a lot of what we're doing, and then we're discovering things from the past and looking ahead to discover what might be happening in the future, right? Where is this heading, and what can we learn from examples of other technologies in the past, and how we got here. So in terms of the practice of what we actually do in the classroom, case studies are really valuable, right? What is happening at the Globe and Mail, right, here in Toronto? How have they tried experimenting with a certain technology, right? Or so many different examples we've heard today, right? How is the Green Line using AI in ways that are helpful? What has been problematic? What has worked well? What hasn't? Then we actually do some critiquing of those cases and those approaches, as well as of the responses we get from AI. So when we get a transcript or we get a summary, what is missing in that summary, right? People often think of summaries as one of the best things the AI does really well, and it does, but it also leaves certain things out in some cases. And so we can actually critique that to dig in a little beneath the surface. We can take on some challenges. So a challenge could be create with your team, 25 different really good headlines for this newsletter post or whatever, blog post or whatever, or descriptions for a YouTube video that you're going to upload, and then do that independently, do that with AI, compare the results, et cetera. So like actually putting into practice, seeing what we can do and challenging ourselves to do more than what we've done in the past, creating new things, creating new newsletters, creating new podcasts, new websites, creating new ideas for kinds of beats that we could create, right? And doing that in conjunction with AI and seeing how AI can help with that. And then debating, right? So taking positions for and against, like really being skeptical and critical and challenging assumptions, taking devil's advocate view, arguing different sides of the question so we really consider things thoroughly. And then also getting into the real world. We're fortunate to be in New York City, so we can visit newsrooms, but in many places around the world, students can actually visit newsrooms. We should be inside the places where journalism is being done, and you learn by getting inspired by seeing what real journalists are doing. In terms of what we're teaching, in terms of the AI, people talk about prompt engineering, and I think what we need to think about is what can the AI do well? What are the ways in which we can frame the project around the things that AI can do well and things that AI can't necessarily do well? How do we envision the result, develop the prompt, but then iterate on that as well, and then humanize it by adding different elements and adding human components to it so that we're working in collaboration and conjunction with AI, essentially as an assistant. There are lots of specific tools that we can teach. I won't go into a lot of them, just to give you some examples. Pinpoint is a free one from Google. It has a lot of different capabilities. One of the primary ones is transcribing, but also allowing you to find any entity in a huge data set of tons and tons of PDFs, for example. Right? You want to find the mention of a person, a place, some other kind of entity, a company. You can use Pinpoint for that, and increasingly they're incorporating some new AI elements into that. DeepL for translation, we've heard about that today. Perplexity, Nikita mentioned, I won't go into depth on these. Notebook LM is a way of applying AI to your own notebooks, your own documents. So this is a new tool from Google, and it's part of a generation of new kinds of AI tools that are increasingly going to apply AI to our own materials. You've heard a little bit about that today. That's going to be an increasingly important thing for journalists, because we don't want just generic AI material from ChatGPT or any of the other engines. We want actually to apply AI to our corpus of material. And then Descript kind of represents the use of AI to assist us in multimedia. So students are learning video, audio, other kinds of data analysis, and they can use AI for that. And Descript is really helpful for that, for multimedia editing with AI. Last couple things, just a couple of specific tools. So running AI locally is one way to, you've heard a little bit about that. There are a couple tools that I think are really helpful for kind of getting students to experiment with that. Olama, I think, was mentioned by Chris earlier. Gen.ai is a new one. Anything LLM is another one. They're both free. And you can show students how you can essentially have some kind of private LLM running that's not serving to train a model of a company like OpenAI, et cetera. And you can show students just the power of the open source system and all of the different players that are there beyond the ones they're hearing most commonly about. And then from the teacher's perspective, there's a ton we can do as teachers. So we can generate better syllabi, better lesson plans, more interesting, more thorough rubrics for our students. We can create analogies to use in explaining things in class. We can generate examples to explain things to students creatively. We can come up with new activities, 5 different ways of organizing this case study discussion to do a role play, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many different things we can do. We can translate our live sessions. So we have a transcript of every class session I'm teaching online. Transcript can be translated into multiple languages for students who need that, because we have global students who are all over the world. And with rubrics, we can give students a picture of exactly what we're looking for and how they can do really well in something, right? And writing a rubric, those of you who have taught before, writing a rubric is very time consuming. It's very tedious. You can spend an hour on one particular exercise or activity rubric like this. right? Or you can describe in detail what it is that you're teaching, what are the criteria you're looking at, and what are the things that would make for an excellent accomplishment of this assignment and what would be a little bit less excellent. And then, and you can do that for each assignment. You can do it, you can iterate on it. Well, I want 4 grade levels instead of 3, or I want, add this criteria. And instantly you have something you can then give to students to give them more clarity about what your expectations are and what success looks like, which is something we don't do enough of for our students. And when it comes to lesson plans, I love creating really detailed lesson plans, but I found that with AI, I can come up with different ideas, and I can get beyond my own biases or my own blind spots. So I might have assumptions about what I should include, but if I generate 5 different lesson plans, I might not have thought about looking at ancient Rome and China in terms of thinking about how journalism was done there historically, or I might not have thought about specific case studies like the Globe investigation into sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. That might not have been the case study that came to my mind. So when it suggests that as part of this lesson plan, that's like, okay, that's an interesting idea. Give me 5 more possible case studies historically that might be relevant, right? And I'm not publishing that. That's for me. That's for my preparation to make my lesson more engaging, more useful, more successful, hopefully. And it takes a matter of minutes, right? Because I'm in dialogue with it as an assistant. And it's a powerful assistant of the sort I've never had before as a teacher. So that is incredibly empowering. And for students, getting instant feedback. This is maybe controversial for some people. I think students should be putting stuff in there and getting feedback on it, right? This is Dr. Hardman from Cambridge University talking about how students get individualized feedback. It's immediate, right? Imagine LeBron James learning to play basketball, right? Saying you have to wait a week to figure out whether your shot went into the hoop. You get instant feedback when you're playing sports, right? Or doing a lot of other artistic activities, right? You can hear if a note is out of tune if you're playing music, right? If you wait 2 weeks or a month to get feedback from a teacher, your opportunity for immediate learning may be lost. If you get immediate feedback from an LLM like this, it's immediate, it's individualized, it's succinct, it's directed to the specific things you're looking for, it's actionable, you can do something with it, it's motivating, right, because it's been told to give you some encouragement, say it in a positive way, be precise. You can have students iterate on their work. And as teachers, again, we can use this to add flair to our presentations. We can create better diagrams, better slides. Like we can just do a lot of things more effectively, more creatively, more efficiently as teachers by taking advantage of this as a resource. This is a new one that's being developed just for teachers, which is really helpful for creating all the kinds of things that I've been talking about, rubrics and syllabi and lesson plans. It's specifically around entrepreneurship, but there's going to be a lot more of this that's taking place. And the last thing is about assessments. A lot of people are concerned about students cheating, and this is a big topic. I won't get into it for now, but students are going to get around these detectors, right, as this is an example of how students get around that. So I think we need to rethink how we assess students. I'm not a big fan of grading. I'm much more a fan of ungrading. We're teaching people to be phenomenal at their craft and to love what they do and to do it with their heart and soul and to really be passionate about it. And grading is often an adversarial and unhelpful process and also unfair and subjective and all those things. But there are other kinds of assessments that we can ask them to do. We probably don't have time to get into all of these, but suffice it to say that we can use AI in interesting ways. We can critique the AI, for example, right? We can take the AI material and build on it, do something better, spot what it's missing. We can show our work and show the process of our work, right, as a way of building evidence that we're learning along the way. And there are lots of other things we can do without screens at all, like presenting, right? When students are presenting and they're presenting live, that's a really powerful way to really understand what they know and don't know. I'd love to collaborate with anyone else interested in any of these subjects about teaching AI or exploring AI in journalism, and feel free to be in touch if that's relevant.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. As journalism educators, a lot of what we do is helping the next generation of reporters build their own toolbox, and I think Jeremy just gave so many great examples of some other tools we can consider to really help empower that next generation of journalists. Also, all the educators, you immediately revealed yourselves when you all perked up at the rubrics and realized that you don't have to spend hours and hours. It was very, you revealed yourself right away. Thank you again, Jeremy. We are going to move over to Mario now to hear about how you're incorporating AI at Columbia.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here. I'm probably the oldest person in the world talking about this. I'm reminded of that. And so my approach, I teach at Columbia University a graduate course titled Mobile Storytelling. Uh, and mobile storytelling is still a revolution we haven't conquered in newsrooms, and now we have AI at our doorstep. So I spent about 2 years researching this book, and when I was approached to write this book, I said, I'm not an expert on this. And the publisher said, well, nobody really is at this point. And so my book is not a love letter to AI, and it's more like an essay where a 77-year-old reflects on a career of 55 years and actually likes a lot of what AI has to offer. So the idea was, how do I incorporate this into my graduate course at Columbia? And so I spent about 6 months contemplating that question. The first thing that occurred to me is that, and I see that with journalists, as I do workshops with journalists, many of them tend to look at this as science fiction, you know. And I'm not talking about people my age. Usually they're in their 40s, their 50s. So I go through this period of, let's get over the fact that this is not a Will Smith movie. This is not robots as we have seen them in film and so on. But at the same time, I emphasize, the more I research AI for my book, the more I realize that humans have the upper hand so far. And the process always begins with a human. Then there is artificial intelligence in the middle, and it's been said here many times today, at the end, whatever you get has to be vetted, has to be checked very carefully. Someone was mentioning earlier about Spanish language, I think it was Troy. Obviously, that's my mother tongue. And I had one of my students, a final project this semester was about that. Spanish is spoken differently, different places. My Cuban Spanish is very different from Mexican Spanish, very different from Castilian Spanish. So if you are an English-speaking journalist and you rely on a translation and to help you with your story, whatever you may get there may be, depending on where you are, the wrong Spanish for your audience. And so, for example, the word torta, which is a cake for most of the Spanish-speaking world, will be a sandwich in Mexico. And so we have to have human vetting at the end of translations of almost any language, because what you may get may not be exactly how people will understand that translation. So the main mantra of my book is here. There is a human at the beginning, there is artificial intelligence in the middle, and there always has to be a human at the end. And so then the next question was, will I split my course into half a semester of mobile storytelling? How do we write, edit, and design for the phone, the smallest of all the platforms, and half a semester of artificial intelligence? That doesn't work, because I would come in every Monday with something about AI that needs to be discussed. So how can we integrate teaching segments when you still have a course that is not titled Artificial Intelligence yet? It's mobile storytelling. So what worked for me was to have these teaching segments. The first one was called AI, an Overall View. I created these graphics with Midjourney. And so all of these will be the first slide for each of these lectures. I had 7 segments throughout the semester to walk students through what this is all about. The second was AI and humans, which is a fascinating topic for me. What is the relationship? In the book, I call it the dance between humans and robots. Then I had connectionism. Then I had neural networks, because you have to understand that all of the machine learning is based a lot on these relationships and connections, teaching the robots to think exactly like we do. Neural networks, making connections. And then I spent about 3 weeks on prompt engineering. Why? To me, this is going to be a course that almost every journalism school will have on its own. Prompt engineering 1 and 2. This will be the skill of the future. We, as journalists, we are word people. We should be the best at communicating with a platform where words is what it's all about. There's no code. We're not. When I was researching my book, I found out that the number one group of people communicating the best are the marketing departments. PR, the old PR firms, marketing departments. Second, Hollywood, screenwriters. journalists do not make the cut even in the first 3 or 4, and yet we are word people. Why? Because we are lazy, and we just write a single sentence and expect the robot to give you information based on that. So prompt engineering was really, I was listening to what Jeremy was talking about, those real hands-on exercises. Get the entire class. You have one story. You give him one story. The entire class individually will do a prompt. They have 5 minutes for this. Then you flash the results. The person writing a 200-word prompt is going to get wonderful information. The person writing, help me with a story about, is not going to get a lot of information. So prompt engineering, I believe, is a subject, and I do it with the journalist in the newsroom, and the difference is my 22-year-olds take to it immediately. The working journalists, not so easy, and they have trouble, word people who have trouble expressing themselves to get reactions from the bot. And finally, I concentrate on with a question: is there artificial creativity? Do you really have the ability? Do these robots have the ability to be creative? So that's fascinating. But subjects that are, I would say you would consider them abstract, the neural networks. Before you begin to teach students how to get ideas from AI or how to get headlines from AI, explain a little bit, maybe 5-10 minutes, about neural networks. Neural networks is connections. A 3-year-old knows that a cat will meow and scratch, and a dog will bite and bark. Those are connections that we make. Neural networks is what these robots are all based on, making these connections. I think Nikita refers to it as predictions, the next thing that's coming up. So I spend not a lot of time because I'm not an expert on this, but I read enough to be able to give them 5 or 10 minutes. The next one is connectionism. Remember that word. All that we get with AI is connections. You can call it predictions, but it's making connections about things that are related. If you are a genius, you probably remember things from 3,000 websites. These bots already have learned 750 billion parameters of information. You can't compete with that. And so, but the humans can do much better because these bots can connect things that are already related. Circles and circles and circles. Humans can make connections between circles, triangles, and all of that. And I see that the older people in the room usually smile when I say that. And the examples are Steve Jobs did not graduate from college, but he took a course. He took a course years after he was already working on ancient Japanese calligraphy. And in his biography, he says that it was the aesthetics that inspired him with most of what we have in the aesthetics of the iPhone. A human can connect the disconnected. The robots could not have made the connection between ancient Japanese calligraphy and the iPhone unless a human prompted that. Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote the famous musical Hamilton, took a historical figure, Hamilton, and connected it with rap music, circles and triangles. And I'm so fascinated by this that I decided what would happen if someone took Emily Dickinson lyrics and tied them to Taylor Swift. I learned a lot of my English when I first came from Cuba with Emily Dickinson. I was fascinated by the poetry of Emily Dickinson, a little refugee who could not say a word in English, but I like Emily Dickinson. So I said, okay, a human can make those connections. There is a lot of the loneliness of Emily Dickinson. She was hiding in a basement. Taylor Swift is not hiding, but anyway, her lyrics have some of that. And I prompted about 200 words. I said, I would like to write a 2-act musical tying the poetry of Emily Dickinson to the lyrics of Taylor Swift, specific examples. I'm not going to be lazy and say, write the musical for me. This particular poem, this particular song. And he gave me, just like you would expect, a 2-act musical with Emily Dickinson and Taylor Swift coming together. A human can do that. Once you prompt, then the robot is going to help you tremendously with that. Why? Because the ultimate, there's a guy named Roy Bahat from Bloomberg, and he says, and I tell that to my students, we need to look at AI as a crane. It does the heavy lifting. If you are building a 75-story structure and the humans had to carry buckets of cement up and down, that will be a long-term proposition. But that crane cannot deal with the payroll so easily, cannot hire, fire, cannot design the building yet. And so it's the combination of the two. I tell the students, you're a journalist about to do a story on abortion. As a human, you already have an idea of what abortion is all about. You have a person, probably, you know a person who had an abortion. So you are going to go out and do the story, interview the rabbi, the priest, the doctor, the woman who had the abortion. The crane next to you asks the question in a prompt, give me data on teenage abortions in the US, the Middle East, Europe, by race, religion, economic background. And while you're doing what humans do, this one is doing the heavy lifting. In order to do that, on the first day of class, I told the students, I have 14 of you, but I'm teaching 28. Each of you has a robot sitting next to you. Let's go through the exercise. Name that robot, whatever. Mine is named Shakira, by the way. I don't know why, but, you know, personalize your robot. This is going to be an assistant who will be with you by your side longer than your current partner, whatever. And so they begin to look at this as the intern, the assistant, the crane that's there 24 hours a day, whenever, whatever time zone you're in. So if you look at that as doing a lot of the heavy lifting, chances are that you are going to not fear this. Doubts and fears are going to be out, and you're going to be using this as a journalist should to help you with headlines, with background information, and so on. And to me, the best doing all of this are the Scandinavians. They're always ahead of the pack. They were ahead of the pack with mobile storytelling. They already, for print editions of the newspaper, which many of them still have, they are doing the entire layout. This is the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten. A human has created templates for every possibility, vertical photo, horizontal photo, whatever. And you apply the template you want, and it gets done, and the newspaper is done daily, the entire layout of the printed with a human verifying at the end the process. Prompt engineering, I've already mentioned this. Whatever you feed the robot is what you're going to get. And so if you say, tell me why President Biden is losing the young voters for election 2024, you're going to get that. But if you say, act as if you are a reporter writing an analysis of why President Biden is losing young voters, and then give me information in terms of age, men, women, educated, non-educated, Latino, Asian, then you're going to get better. So journalists need to up their act. They need to emphasize what they've learned all along, words. And so this is 2 weeks ago in Germany with a financial newspaper. Journalists have to learn this. They are not in journalism school. So we are not just teaching the journalism students. We are learning the people who graduated 10 years ago or 15 years ago on exactly the same thing. This is a 2-hour prompt engineering workshop, just hands-on. Is there artificial creativity? I don't think so, not yet. And here is just a final example here. What I do almost every day is I will take illustrations done by humans and feed the information into Midjourney or DALL-E to see what I get. On this day, El País of Madrid had the writer Mario Vargas Llosa on the day he retired. I'm not writing anymore after 30 years being a columnist. It's a beautiful illustration. There he is with a copy of El País and his photo on the cover. I put all of that information into Midjourney, and I get Mario Vargas Llosa with 4 feet. Okay. Hands, ears, and feet, problematic here. So that, I rest my case with that. So, but he looks like Mario Vargas Llosa. The newspaper is not El País, but look at the shoes, okay? So my parting shot is that while AI excels at tasks like data analysis and pattern recognition, it often struggles with generating truly imaginative ideas. More importantly, AI connects patterns, but humans make connections between seemingly unrelated concepts or ideas. Human creativity is not just about processing information, it's about imagination, intuition, and the ability to see possibilities where others might see limitations. So I think the humans are on top. Thank you very much. There you go.
Mario, I'm definitely going to buy a ticket for your Taylor Swift, Emily Dickinson musical. A really excellent takeaway, though, that I think is really important here is that humans are on top, but if we shy away from this, we're not going to have the upper hand for much longer. And I think Emily Dickinson herself had it right when she said, if your nerve deny you, go above your nerves. So I think that there's ample opportunity to not shy away and start to play around with the creativity here.
You're a fan of Emily, right?
I don't know what the giveaway was there. Florent, let's hear what's happening over at the Université de Montréal.
Yeah, me again for you. So, how to teach this thing? I teach AI to two different crowds. A lot of journalists in newsroom, especially at Radio Canada, but I'm starting to do some teaching for different newsrooms and for graduates at the University of Montreal. The program is structured in a way that a lot of students have a background in another specialization, such as law, politics, history, name it. So I would say it's a different approach for journalists and for students, but we'll try to explore the different aspects. The first one I would say is deconstruct. Deconstruct, first of all, my teaching, because I mean, in the last 2-3 years, I had to completely redo my course and my syllabus and spend a lot of time thinking about it, and I'm sure you did too. And, you know, fighting this thing like we think that the Gen Z are lazy, and if we teach them to use AI, they will use it in a way that it's not going to be beneficial for them in terms of pedagogy and that kind of things. And from my perspective, from what I can see, it's the total opposite. A lot of students are very curious. That said, and it's the same in newsrooms, when they start to use AI, it's in a more basic way, like basic prompts, like, oh, tell me about this, and I will just copy paste this thing and hope, like, with my finger crossed that I get a C or a B maybe. But once you explain the mechanism behind it and how to talk to the machine, they're like, oh, okay, I see what I can do and how to just improve my work. And I have two interesting examples in mind at the end of the session, because I teach digital journalism. We spend a lot of time on data journalism, on coding and that kind of things. And, you know, for a lot of students, it can be complicated. They're like, hey, I like words, but like spreadsheet, come on, what I'm doing here. And at the end of the session, one of the students was like, you know, I really hated data journalism, but I spent a few hours with ChatGPT trying to understand this thing. Maybe because I was a bad teacher, I don't know. But still, she was like, hey, I managed to understand it and to like it. And her final project was really brilliant. So it's an interesting use case. And, you know, speaking of Waterloo, and not the Canadian one, obviously, it's really a question of overcoming our fears, both in newsrooms but as students, because if we put ourselves in the shoes of students in journalism, they're like, maybe they will question their choices in life and be like, why did I choose to do this? And you know, really taking the time to explain, like, no, this is gonna be a very interesting profession, specialization, and there's a future in it. So how do you deconstruct this? It's important. I've talked about underperformization, so I won't go there again. But, you know, overcoming fears about AI and what it is not also is important. And the recipe for disaster is, for me, if you just think, if you don't understand, like, what AI is and what AI is not, I think you will use it in ways that can be really detrimental, both for your learning, for your education, and for your work. So it's really a question of, deconstructing this and understanding. And once you did this kind of really intro, I have 4 pillars, I would say, for teaching, which is like really understanding what AI is. It's a next token prediction model. You can do a lot of things with mathematics, but not everything. So to understand this in really in a deep way, and how to cover it. And maybe it's more focused on the journalists more than for the students, but the transparency index at Stanford, for example, is really interesting for this. It's a useful tool because you have 12 different criteria of evaluation for LLMs, such as labor, data, computing, that kind of thing. So it's a simple tool, but really efficient for journalists to understand, hey, when I talk about a model, what do I need to care about? Being careful about shiny demos. We've all seen these Sora videos, and we're like, oh, whoa, it's the end of, video motion designers. And 2-3 weeks ago, you're like, oh, this video was edited with an old school video editing software. And you're like, okay, be careful about it. How do you report about benchmarking? Benchmarking is something really important, but it's also a marketing tool. You can say, hey, my model is scoring on 80 points on MMLU. Yeah, but what does it mean, and how was it prompted? Because if you prompt, and I won't dig deep into this, but if you prompt your model for 3 shots or 5 shots, for example, you will have very different results. And there's no standardization for benchmarking LLMs. So when you receive this nice press release, we have the best model and blah, blah, blah. And at Hugging Face, I can see like 100 models launch each week. And at the end of the week, it's like, is it a breakthrough? Not that much. So it's important to understand how to cover it and very much in details. The third aspect is how to talk to the machine. So yeah, a good prompt engineering course is utterly important. And the fourth one is the ethics of covering it. And I think we talked a lot about ethics in the previous panel. So yeah. I also talked about editorial judgment and curiosity. So I think it's important for students and for journalists to reflect about this question of what are our key differentiators regarding AI. And then, as a first step, I think it's important to learn to fly, or dare to fly, I would say. So thinking of journalism as a specialization, so what kind of tools you have to help you to enhance, let's say, image recognition, video editing, that kind of thing. It's very important to understand the possibilities. And I have a concrete example at Radio Canada. When we had this thing with Meta, the blockage, we really thought thoughtfully about how can we reach audiences when we don't have this important leverage. And we created a new format on the app, which is a kind of carousel of repackage information with quotes, images, and that kind of things. And after a few months, we are like, it's very interesting. We get a lot of tractions from the public with this format, but it's also really time-consuming to produce. So are we able to build, first of all, are we able to analyze each task required to produce this format? And are we able to train a model to script, to adapt content from video stories or written stories to this specific format? And we had quite good results in terms of packaging, both in terms of words, but also images, structures, narratives. So it's really a question of, once you learn how to talk to the machine, you are able to build interesting tools. And what things that I want to keep in mind is, English is the new hot programming language, because you have this wonderful possibility to talk to the machine in your natural language and steer in the direction you want. So it's quite important. And you have a lot of different aspects, and I won't explain them all, but you know, if you dissect different formats, audio, video, data analysis, investigative technique, and visual are quite interesting aspects of development. And for journalists, I think to wrap up my presentation, make time to learn is really important. And as a former manager, I think it's really something that news execs need to think about. And share knowledge and tools, because each time I'm asking journalists if they use AI, it's either taboo or they're like, well, yes, but on my own, and I don't share anything with my colleagues. And it's a shame, because what's the most important things for a newsroom? It's collaborative work. So are we able to think together about how do we prompt the machine? Can we share our expertise or experiences or pitfalls? Like, I tried this, it was a mess, and here's what I learned. It's something where you can create a lot of value. If we don't talk about our prompts, and I'm not sure if any newsroom have a prompt library, and it's a shame because it could be such a useful tool. So build stuff, try things, and we will make a lot of interesting things. And for our students, well, it's a little bit different, but I think for as educators, we have an important role to play to like teach them hard what AI is, and it's really ingrained in every aspect of the course. It's not just one course at the beginning of the session. And help them shine in newsroom, because I think they will be equipped with fresh knowledge that newsroom needs and lack. So it's interesting for them. So the main aspect, I'd say, for an educator is really to build bridges between students and newsrooms to help them being able to, build better journalism with AI. So yeah.
Thank you so much, Florent. When the three of us had the chance to talk prior to the panel, one of the takeaways that you all had was that AI can't be an afterthought in the classroom, and I think you've all offered up some really solid examples of how you've been able to really weave it throughout everything that you're teaching, and I think that's a really great starting point. Mario, I'm curious for you, what were the steps that you took to kind of make sure that you built that infrastructure so it wasn't an afterthought, that it was fully woven in like we saw there?
I think it was just a matter of trying to, all of this is related to journalism, obviously. So if I'm teaching, my basic class is mobile storytelling, which is how do you write for this particular platform, which changes the way we put a story together. And at the core of that is the fact that most content in the world is created in a horizontal format, but 80% of the people are consuming it in a vertical format. And so the print mentality still exists, but forget that. Many people are creating content for the screen of a computer when most people are doing this and not reading this way. So that horizontal versus vertical is a revolution that we haven't conquered yet. And so I said, how can I continue to teach mobile storytelling where you write and you show? It's like a text conversation. I'm here in Toronto. Look at the beautiful skyline of the city. Picture. Well, for the average journalist, the visuals are here and the text is never interrupted. I'm old enough to have someone in the audience all the time tell me, but in 1978, you wrote that text is never interrupted with visuals. But that was 1978. In print, you look at photos, you look at 4 photos in here, and then you read the story. Here, you read and you show because you're scrolling through. So anyway, so how could I continue to teach that, which is vital, vertical flow of the story and so on, and then add artificial intelligence. So I tried to make it, how can you use AI to help you with the composition of a mobile story? So that's how it began. And then I realized after several workshops that you needed to give people an idea of why these robots do what they do before you went into lesson number 1, outlining a story. I think that was an epiphany sort of moment. And once I did that, then every class I would handle a specific subject, but also at the same time update what did I learn this week about AI. In education, scope and sequence is the whole idea. You have to introduce students to something. They have to sort of master it a little bit before you go on to the next thing. So that's how I did it. But the difficulty, obviously, is let's say you're teaching a class in reporting. You need to put AI into that. But reporting is extremely important. You need to teach how to put a story together. But the question is, how can you use elements of AI from the very beginning to help students when they're learning inverted pyramids and basic story structure? And that is fun to do because AI can help you. I don't know how others do it, but incorporate, don't abandon the essentials that you have to teach, but add a component which becomes the crane for both the teacher and the student.
So I think really the fact that it's a tool that can really help to elaborate the way we teach these essentials to students, right? And
Exactly.
kind of meet them where they're at. Jeremy, what about you? What was your process like to make sure that it wasn't an afterthought, that it was fully woven in?
I think. Well, first of all, I wanted to just say something about the inverted pyramid. One thing that's fun to do with AI is to generate examples of bad work or mistakes. Because as a teacher, when you're preparing for a class or for anything, generating examples or wrong answers or all that is time consuming and difficult. So you could say, here's the format of the inverted pyramid. Here's how this works. Generate 5 examples of how this can go extremely wrong, or like examples of a story that sort of doesn't exhibit these characteristics. And but back to your question. So in terms of how to incorporate it, I think the whole art of designing a course, whether it's an entire course or an individual session, right? It's about designing an experience, and you start with the end in mind, right? So it's backward design is what it's often referred to, right? Or universal design for learning, a lot of names for it. You essentially, what are your objectives? What are the 3 things you want students to be able to do at the end of this session or this course? And then secondarily, how will they exhibit that knowledge or skill? Like, how will you know if you succeeded, right? And then how will you prepare them to do that, right? And so if you want them to understand, to have an open mindset about AI and like understand some of its limitations and also understand, some of the ways it can be really useful, how would they exhibit that? Well, they would show you in their work or in their explanations that they understand that. Well, how would you get them to do that? Well, let's think about all of the different tools at our disposal. Let's look at case studies. Let's look at challenges and examples, and let's have debates. And let's use all of the tools at our disposal, other than just talking at students. Let's weave those in throughout the course, through the readings, through the assignments, through the in-class activities, through the field trips we're going to take, through the guest speakers we're going to have, through the activities we're going to do each and every class. So that would be my approach. And every session should be structured. Just like when we think about our journalism, we craft the stories we create, or a magazine issue. We put it together with all different styles of things, right? We structure a play with different scenes, different rhythms and pacing, right? Emily Dickinson or Lin-Manuel Miranda, like when they're thinking about Hamilton, there's different scenes with different numbers of characters.
Right.
And different moods and different tones. And so our classes also should be structured that way, like creatively, and thinking about how do these blocks fit together to weave together an experience that's varied and that has some elements of AI, but also some elements of, like, let's talk about the ethical issues, or let's put away, our machines and like just talk human to human. So that's how you incorporate, I think.
And Florent, you're doing that at the classroom level, but then also the newsroom level. So how does your approach change based on those 2 venues for learning?
Well, for teaching at the university, I think one thing that changed a lot is, a lot of the times you have questions and it's like, well, let me Google that for you. And right now it's more like, well, not let me ChatGPT that for you, but hey, you can ask to the machine once you lay the foundation, like how to talk to the machine, how to integrate it correctly. Like, don't expect to use it as a knowledge base. But let's say, for example, for data analysis, which is quite a difficult course, I think, because first of all, people are afraid of spreadsheets, and I'm like, it's not rocket science. You can like just feeling comfortable with your capacities is the first step. But then when we explore, like, here's the data set, here's how we are going to analyze it and that kind of thing. And they're like, okay, but what's the formula for this, and why my formula is not working, and that kind of thing. And I can see, and you said it's important to experiment it. And I think when you have 30, 40 people in your classroom, you cannot, as a teacher, be the personal assistant of everyone. But if you teach them to use AI correctly, they have a personal assistant for this. And they are, I think, really able to go deeper than the previous years with this useful tool. They're like, okay, I can like really interact and have a sense rapidly of capacities and autonomy regarding their knowledge and what they can accomplish. For journalists, it's a little bit different, and I really like the whiteboard exercise, which is at the beginning of the session, I asked them, well, let's define AI in one word, and more often than not, it's fear, replacement, that kind of thing, and it's important to hear it and to recognize that these fears are legitimate. But at the end of the training, I'm like, okay, let's redo the exercise. And maybe it's just because they want to be nice with me, I don't know. But the words are very different. And it's important both for me because it's rewarding, but for them to measure like what journée or what, like, I don't know how to say it in English, le chemin parcouru, like what did they learn and how in 3 hours they are able to really change their mind. And it's a question of the mindset, feeling comfortable with the machine instead of fearing it is the beginning of, feeling comfortable exploring the possibilities instead of being like, ooh, am I gonna be replaced by this machine? So it's important.
I would love to open up to questions from the participants here. I'm finding this very shocked. There we go. I was going to say I'm shocked that we're in a room of journalists and educators, and no one wanted to raise their hand. I thought I was going to have to call on folks.
Thanks so much. Yeah, I have just following on your point there, Florent, about like teaching data, because I do the same thing. And I was just reflecting on something that Nikita was talking about earlier, which is the ability of some of the AI tools, LLM-powered tools, to help with all manner of data-related tasks. And part of me is thinking, woohoo! I don't have to write long calculated fields in Tableau anymore. Yeah, that's great. And then part of me is thinking, well, wait a minute. As to your point, it's hard to get students motivated to learn how to sort data in a spreadsheet and create a calculated field and just do some basic tasks with the. So I'm just wondering, there's a tension there between, like what you're teaching like, are we skipping too far ahead by kind of going right to the, let's get the self-driving car before you've learned how to, like spray the carburetor cleaner, into the, kind of to torture that analogy a little bit. So I'm just wondering how the three of you think about that tension between kind of the basic building blocks versus the, that great thing that's going to solve all these problems for us, maybe.
I don't know. People may disagree with me on this. Like, I think there's a lot that we've taught that years later we're like, they probably didn't need to learn the step-by-step Flash process, right? I have a colleague who, like,
I learned it.
Yeah,
I learned Flash.
Yeah,
ActionScript.
and I mean, we could debate whether that's useful or not. Like, there's a line of reasoning that says, learning difficult things teaches you how to learn, and that's why we learn calculus, and that's why we learn Flash. Maybe. But what else could you have been doing in that time, right? If you could have that time back, and you could say, I would have learned something else, what would that have been? I'm not saying I have the clear answer to that, but I am skeptical of this idea that we need students to learn like these little detailed things that in a couple of years are going to feel like ancient history. And there's a long tradition of that. Like, we don't teach students to do linotype or whatever, like, all of these like ancient things that we used to do as part of the core practice of journalism, right? I don't know any students who are using the dark room anymore. Like, it's nice. I mean, it's nice. Those who've been in a dark room, like, it's kind of cool. It's nice. It teaches you about light and dark and shadows and, like, there's value to that. But there's value to 10,000 other things, and we're all going to die in a relatively small amount of time. So we have to like figure out, what we're going to do with that time. And so, hopefully not today, but you never know. And so do you want that to be time spent on like this ticky-tacky kind of stuff? Or like, can we be more ambitious? So I would actually, I mean, I don't know. It's hard to like generalize around that but in general, I guess, if I had to generalize, I would argue for being more ambitious. So we don't have to teach this individual thing. We're going to create we're going to like create this entire, like Nikita's project is a good example. Like there's 10 million data points in that data set of like New York City traffic accidents. Like we're going to explore this entire data set together. And we're going to take up different pieces of it. And here's, we're going to talk about what kind of questions to ask. We're going to use the AI to give us some ideas, but we're also going to wrestle with that. We're going to look at what different data sets we could choose from, or where can we get data sets, or where does this data set come from? We're going to ask questions that are human questions and analysis questions, but we're not just going to focus on like the formula for one field. We're going to like come up with a whole data visualization just today. So I think I would be more inclined to that direction, like using it as a crane to like ramp up our ambition for what we can do, rather than adhering to what we think they used to need to know. I don't know. What do you both think?
Well, I think that this is a topic where people are either going to agree or disagree. But for example, we talk about inverted pyramids, and I know that inverted pyramids are not really, they are a result of the Civil War, and put the 5 W's at the beginning, so in case there's a telegraph breakdown, you got all of this. There has to be a reference to that. But you also try to see, does that have any application to the present? And what is interesting about this is that I agree with you that we need to sort of skip to what is it that you can do today, but there has to be a quick reference to what was there before. A typical example, and some of you are too young to know, the word letting. Letting is now called interline spacing, okay? I will never be able to say that myself, because when I began at the Miami Herald, there was hot type. Leading is actual pieces of lead that would go between the lines. So 9 points, 9 on 10 will be how many pieces of lead in between the 9. So when the students are talking about interline spacing, which is what they know, I take 45 seconds to tell them the previous term, which is the one in my head, is letting. And you do a quick review of that, and they look at you just the way they look at you when you say, that looks like sort of Perry Mason, and they say, who was Perry Mason? Or when you say, this is, Diana Ross up front and the Supremes, who are the Supremes? So you basically catch yourself and you say a little historical reference. But I'm in agreement that, there is a lot to cover in a class today, more happening every day. And I think a lot of these historical references, read about it. If you really are interested in letting, read all about it. There is an Edmund Arnold book on the subject, newspaper makeup. Read all about it. But in this class, I give you the terminology, but we move on and do what you need to learn for today.
And the data journalism example is interesting because it's quite a complicated beast to learn. And I always struggle as a teacher because I'm like, how far can I bring people into this question? And maybe on 10 people, you will have 1 or 2 who will be like, I love this and I want to learn everything about it. And the 8 other will be like, why am I here, actually? And, AI can help like leveling up the playing field, because the 8 will be like, oh, okay, maybe I can find some help with my assistant. And the 2 other one was like, oh, look at that. I made a shiny interactive graphic with all of these things. And so, it's really helpful. And one thing that I did in the course is just building a personal teaching assistant. So I record every course, like everything I say and my, blah, 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 and all the presentation, the notes. And after the course, people can interact with the chatbot and basically like asking questions like, hey, the professor is so bad at explaining this. Can you help me understanding that? And most of the time, it's more patient and pedagogical than me. So it's like, oh, I get it, finally. So, it's a useful tool just to because every student has their own strengths and weaknesses, and I feel that it's an helpful tool. It's not perfect, it's not panacea, but it's helpful just to as an additional tool in our toolbox. And again, at the end of the session, it's what will they remind about your teaching? And maybe the two of the group who are really interested, who are really into data journalism will be like, wow, that was the best course I had. And the 8 others were like, okay, that was okay. And so you're just going to improve your ratings at the end of the session, I hope.
Do we have any more questions in the room right now? You can go to Abby over here.
So I was wondering if journalism industry as like news organizations and journalism schools are moving at the same pace, and if students graduating from journalism schools who have learned AI and how to implement that in the newsroom will ultimately be frowned upon or rejected in the newsroom if the industry is not moving at the same pace.
Can I do 2 seconds on that? I think that this is where switching the role of the mentor and the mentee should have happened already 5 years ago. A mentor is always the older, venerable person who's been warm in a chair there for 25 years, and the mentee is a new one. I tell my students, I hope that when you get your first job, you will have a boss that would allow you to mentor him or her. That takes a person who is very secure and who is ready to learn. Because I know that we graduate students who are more knowledgeable about mobile storytelling and AI than many of the editors they will work for. And so I do this role playing. I sit on the edge of the desk the last 5 minutes of class, and obviously I don't have to pretend that I'm old. I said, you know, I'm the old editor that you will be working for. And we do this role playing, and you are going to try to respectfully convince me that you can teach me a few things. And I make them do that. And I say, for every element of new that you are telling me you're going to teach me, you're going to pat my back and say, and I know what a great and glorious career you've had. I want to learn so much from you. And then, however, the way we write stories today, but tell me more about those 25 years you spent at the New York Times. Wasn't that absolutely wonderful? That's the way to do it. You know, because your boss has value. This person has had 25, 30 years, 15 years of experience that you don't have, but you have now learned stuff that this person has no idea. So switching the role of mentor and mentee is key to the industry. The other thing that nobody has mentioned in this conference today is the fact that the junction of technology and journalism, which is being sort of getting closer and closer together, is now at its peak. And I am observing something that nobody writes about or talks about in my own consulting work. Most of the AI projects that I'm involved with are ran by product departments and not by the newsroom. Not one case, 2, 3 major newspapers around the world. I deal with these 28, 29-year-olds with, you know, 6-figure salaries who are the product developers. And I say, but eventually editors are going to have to deal with this. And I have to keep pushing. When do I meet the editors who are going to use these tools? So I think the industry needs to sort of come to terms with the fact is AI is seen as an ultimate high-tech development that the newsroom will inherit whenever the product people develop the product. That is wrong. The journalists have to show interest. And I know that this is not within the context of what we're talking about, but in my quiet moments, I think about this. This is going to come to eventually catch up with them. Journalists need to work with the product people, but there's also a large age gap in there and training gap. None of the product people took 1 day of journalism. And there are 100 people in the product department, 50 in the editorial department, and the editors don't think much of these young people, which is the way it was when the internet came. A bunch of young people playing in the sandbox. Well, we know how that ended.
Yeah, I liked a lot of what you said. I think, first of all, just teaching students about the real world of the newsroom and also the social skills you need. But back to your question, I think the skills you learn when you're learning new things that aren't heavily present across newsrooms become really superpowers for you, because then the newsroom can look to you as someone who's going to bring some new ideas. I had a student who's in an AI and journalism independent study, and her interviewees, every single time she had an interview, all our students have an internship between their second and third semester. They're all graduate students. And every single interview she did, that's like one of the main things they wanted to ask her about. Because they are eager to learn. They want, some of them want to know more, and they just see new people as the way of getting that. So I think it's an advantage. And I think that the way in for people is not to talk about it in the abstract way, like AI as this thing in the abstract, but specifically, how is this going to be helpful, or how is this useful? What are the specific ways in which you use it? And the ways in which it combines with other journalistic skills, right? So it's not a thing in isolation, but it's a thing that's part of a workflow that you use to more efficiently produce social videos or social audio, or like, clean up audio really, really quickly and efficiently, so you can do X, Y, or Z, or so you can do 3 more interviews and get to know the subject more deeply, or whatever, right? It's like, it's not the end in itself is part of what I'm saying. It's a means to an end, and that end can be really valuable, and you can make an even more powerful goal once you're using it, because it can shorten the time you're spending on cleaning up the audio, for example, right? Like in that specific use case, like cleaning background noise, anyone who's done that in like old school audio editing programs, like you have to isolate like certain aspects of the waveform. It's like very time consuming and very tedious and not particularly intellectually interesting, right? It's like moving linotype or whatever. Using Descript Studio Sound and like cleaning it, it's pretty good. Sounds pretty great. And now you can spend more time thinking about, okay, who else should I be interviewing, right? And so you're doing more journalism, not less, because of the AI, or more in-depth journalism, I would say, than less. Which is contrary to the assumption, right? The assumption is like it's a shortcut, or it's cheating, or something like that. I think it's actually, in a way, it's the opposite. It's if you're doing those tedious things, you're not allowing yourself enough time to do the actual really human part, which is like finding more people to interview, thinking more deeply about what aspects of the story you haven't considered yet, et cetera. And that's the way I would frame it, particularly for old school people who aren't interested in the technology part. Maybe, some of them might not be. They're interested in like, what's the journalistic result you're getting, and you can make that case, then you win on both fronts. Yeah.
Florent, did you want to jump in?
Well, you need to be prepared to be told, oh, you want to move too fast. And it's something that I heard in my career, and I was like, okay. Last time I checked, we weren't moving too fast. So it can be complicated. And I think the onus or the responsibility lies on the shoulders of newsroom managers, because how do you create, but also on the shoulders of teachers, like how do you create an environment when there is common expertise built around a diverse newsroom with different perspectives, and being able to hear what people think about AI, what are their fears, what are their the opportunities they see also. But to your question, it can be complicated, but it was like pushing really harder and thinking like, hey, there is something into this and we should try it. And you can start small with really like small iterations, small ideas, and showing tangible results. It will give you a runway for a bigger project, and that's going to be interesting. But your question is also valid, for example, for TikTok. Why are a lot of newsrooms way behind to open channels or to let people explore this tool? Well, 80% of the reason is newsroom managers are not on TikTok. They're like, what? Why should we go there? So, it can be complicated, but it's not impossible.
I think we had a question in the back. Oh, did we have one over here? Okay, we could get the microphone there.
Hi, thank you. I used the word existential earlier this morning in terms of knowledge and what it is that we're teaching. I'm going to set that aside, but ask you in the context of where do you draw the line with what might be considered academic misconduct, what might be considered an infraction? So if you accept, I know every university is dealing with this differently, but let's accept the principle that students are expected to produce work themselves. Okay, that's kind of a blanket thing. Where do you draw the line? How do you handle it? And are you finding yourselves changing the assignments and the assessments that you're doing? If you put that rubric, students can put that rubric in their assignment and churn out an A assignment. Because the rubric becomes a really interesting. I answered instead of asking. But okay, so let's go back.
Well, short answer for me, I'm trying to build this trust contract with the students, which is you have the right, and I encourage you to use AI, but in each of your work, explain how did you use it, what kind of prompts did you use, and that kind of things, and why the result was good or was bad, and like really creating this safe and innovative environment. And maybe it's naive, but the other part is I adapted several evaluations to be less focused on potentially plagiarism or lazy uses of AI. So this is a mix of these two different elements for me. But I'm curious.
For me, it's transparency. On the first day of class, you come clean with each other. I use AI, you use AI. We will tell each other. So if I'm doing a presentation on whatever the subject, and I have taken 2 ideas from AI, I will tell them, I had completed this lecture and I put all of this into ChatGPT, and it gave me 2 things that I had not thought about. You mentioned that, and they have to do the same. With students, the prompt is the key. If the prompt is smart, if the student has come prepared to the prompt as opposed to a lazy prompt, I can see that there has been an effort to communicate the robot. And of course, here is where we have this human-to-human communication was never perfect either. I'm old enough to remember that. The number of times that an editor would assign a story and the angle that editor had in her mind is not exactly what was communicated to the reporter. The reporter writes a story, comes back, and the editor says, this is not what I had in mind. So when I hear humans and robots are not communicating well, I say, well, humans and humans were not communicating well. And so I think that transparency is the key. You have to tell the students, I use it, you use it. We come clean with each other and we say, I use this for my assignment. I use this for my lecture. And, I think there's room for error, but that's the best that we can do.
I think what we ask has to change. What we assess has to change. If we are assessing something that can be simply done in a rote way, yes, we can use transparency. I think those are all good approaches. But I think fundamentally, maybe we need to rethink what we're asking students to do and what we're evaluating. So if we are, and I'll give you my specific examples. So I'm teaching entrepreneurial journalism. Students are creating new projects, new newsletters, new podcasts in one particular class, for example. So they have to actually present their ideas. They have to make the case for the idea. They have to interview people, talk to people in their community, understand the needs and the context, the landscape. What else is out there already? What are the advantages or strengths of the existing things? And all of that stuff, unfortunately, the AI is not going to really solve that for them. The AI is not going to present for them. It's not going to make the case for them. It's not going to tell them how it connects to their own human life experience, lived experience. It's not going to respond to the questions for them when we engage in class. So to me, that's a more kind of human, a less AI susceptible kind of thing. And as a result, and it's hopefully going to be more akin to what they're going to encounter in the real world, right? Which is like having to explain things and to make the case verbally. There could be writing components as well, but it's going to be tied into their own ideas and their own project, and they're going to be tying it to their own experience or the interviews that they themselves have conducted. So I'm not sure the AI is going to solve that for them. And I think also as part of our understanding of what students are doing, we need to, and maybe this is part of the transparency part, like understand the steps along the way and have them show their work, essentially show their evidence, right? Show their different drafts, what are the interviews they did, who did they talk to, like where did they get this information, all of that. So once we get into those kinds of assignments, the AI is less relevant, or less relevant in terms of like for cheating purposes, let's say. So that's my kind of that's my instinct. It doesn't solve everything. So if you're in an intro writing class and you're asking students to write, right, and there's presentations isn't enough, then we have to rethink how we do that. And there are ways of doing that. There are a lot of people thinking about that and approaching that. Part of it is about annotating, actually requiring them to create something with AI and then annotating that, right? And to do things live and to do things offline, to do things in other formats, verbally, et cetera, et cetera. So there are some ways, but it's challenging. It requires us to rethink what we've done. But frankly, we should rethink what we've done. Like the model of education, a lot of what we teach is like from centuries ago, right? And so we need to like challenge ourselves and rethink that and blow that up and yeah, I think that's a good thing actually, if it's a forcing function.
Okay, I see quite a few hands over here, and we are kind of getting close to time. So if I can just have people maybe ask their question, and then we can have one person answer.
All right. Is it really ethical to use AI for assessments and feed ChatGPT students' paper? Like, I work for two institutions, and one institution allows me to do that, and then the other one, it's not ethical. So what do you think of that?
Does somebody want to take a stab at that, if it's ethical to use AI to assess?
I think it shouldn't replace our judgment as instructors. So I don't think it should be used, instead of me giving you feedback, you just have AI feedback. However, I think it can be useful to supplement my own judgment. And one way, and particularly this is relevant if you have a large class, you have 100 students, right? And you're going to be, giving them writing feedback. Either they're not going to get any feedback, they're going to get minimal feedback, or they're going to wait a long time, et cetera, et cetera. So in a large class, I think it's helpful for students to get their own feedback along the way through AI in the way that I showed, right, as an example. And we kind of create prompts and guide them to create really detailed prompts that provide feedback on specific elements, right, and then give them a chance to iterate on that, make sure they understand the feedback, et cetera, et cetera. In terms of like the end result, I don't think it's probably optimal for the AI to be the sole arbiter or to be the kind of only provider of feedback. But I think there are ways in which it can supplement the human feedback, I guess. And in terms of the ethics of like the uploading, I mean, there's some issues around like the data, right, and the privacy and FERPA and all those, some kind of technical issues there. So in the ideal situation, it would be in a private LLM kind of situation or an offline LLM kind of situation, or it would be in a secure way, so it's not being fed back to the model and so forth, and it's not just including their private information and all that.
At the end of the day, it's going to be like the prompts. Like for example, if the students are using right prompts and then the teachers are using the right prompts, so nobody's reading anything. Like it's a mashing game. Like the students prompt it properly, and then they get some stuff, and then I prompt, and then for the assessments, and then at the end of the day, nobody's robot to robot interactions, and there is no human elements in it.
I think there has to be human assessment. But what I was going to say is, because these robots have this wide net of information, when I was writing my book, at the end of every chapter, I would put the chapter in, and inevitably, it would come back with one or two elements of that subject which I had not thought about. I'm only a human. I don't have access to 175 billion parameters of information. So,
It's gonna be useful.
yeah,
It's useful
I
feedback.
think that, but there was a chapter written before. There was a human who wrote something, put it in there, and say, what else could I have said here? And inevitably, in every case, it enhanced the chapters of my book by one fact, one detail. So I think that's the same with assessments.
Think about your doctor. Like if you're going to have a radiologist, right, who's been trained, and the AI is going to give this radiologist in training like detailed feedback on what they're spotting, what they're not spotting. think about if it's going to affect your own life. Like, would you want someone who's gotten really high quality, accurate, repeated feedback from an AI so that they can really understand the subject really well? Or would you want just the medical school faculty person who may not have time to give them a lot of detailed feedback to be the one who trained them, right? When you're in that examining room the next time, like, I don't know. I think I would want the person who's been trained the best, and if that means like the AI is part of that training, like, that's okay from my perspective.
Just being mindful of time, I know we have some other questions.
But just like to add something, it's a personal perspective, but I wouldn't feel comfortable to completely assess work with an AI, because it's the same with a news story. Assessment, in my opinion, requires a lot of editorial judgment, especially work in journalism studies. So I don't feel like AI is good enough, and I don't want to rely on AI for this, because a good aspect of why I'm teaching and why I'm paid for this is because of my judgment on the work that students produce. So, yeah, that's yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Nadaba, you had a question?
I just wanted to ask something to what Mario was saying. We want original work, so we're in this double position where we want students to be great journalists and use every tool they can to be the best they can, but we're also educators, and so we're mindful of this. We want to see their original work, and this has always been like, people have asked people to proofread their work, and so we've always had a case of layers upon the original work, and do we really know whose work this is? But now, for example, when you mention you write a chapter, then you ask AI, hey, is there something I didn't think of? And it makes a couple brilliant suggestions. So students, when they do their original work, and we're asked this already, is it okay for me to take my original work and then have AI make suggestions how I can make it better? But do we need them to somehow annotate, here's my original work, then when I added, and then when an AI made suggestions, it suggested this, and so I've incorporated that? Or are we just getting into layers that they are not going to do in a news organization? Like Grammarly is already telling you how to fix stuff. It's an algorithm. It's so it's not your original work. So there's already corrections and enhancements being made to work, and I puzzle over this because I don't want to discourage use of tools, but students are kind of trying to figure out, is this wrong? Am I doing something wrong by using these tools?
But you know what's interesting is that when you're writing a book, or when you're writing a story, we all have an editor. I realized that I was very careful in my book to have whatever I got from ChatGPT with a gray screen, and it says, as ChatGPT sees it. But suggestions from my editors are in the middle of my chapters with no credit. I didn't stop, put it in gray, and say, my editor added this. Okay, so here we have this issue of being, I am extremely careful with whatever I got from AI. I put it in gray, I specified, but my chapters have corrections, suggestions, additions from 2 editors in New York who are only credited at the beginning as editors, but their work specifically is not credited. So where do you draw the line? And I think that these are topics that are new for us, but transparency will be the key. Whether you got it from the editor, whether you got it from AI, you need to say where you got it from. And you know, there are many professors who are saying AI is not allowed in my class. I think that is totally wrong. You know, this is beyond the invention of printing, beyond the internet. It's not going to stop. How can you tell a class who is already using this, AI is not allowed here? And so I think that has not been mentioned here today, but there are a lot of educators who don't understand AI, have a fear of it, just like their editors. AI is not allowed here. I walk into newsrooms where AI is not permitted yet until we know more about it. So we're in the infancy of all of this, and there are no clear answers. We just have to be as ethical as we can.
Nadaba, you can go ahead with your question.
what is the most fun or the most popular in-class activity around generative AI or prompt engineering?
It's not an example with students, but with journalists. I have this example. It's a scrum with François Legault, so the Prime Minister of Quebec. And he's at the UN, and he's really proud about, the energetic environmental footprint of Quebec, because we have a lot of, dams and that kind of thing. And so he talks a lot about, hydroelectricity and solar and wind and blah, blah, blah. And then a journalist asks, what about nuclear? And it's like, we don't touch that. And the exercise I do with journalists is, okay, how will you prompt the scrum? So you have the verbatim, you have the full text of the interview, and what do you do with this? So you're with ChatGPT on choose your own model, and how do you extract relevant information with this conversation with journalists? And so people are like, oh yeah, it's an interesting synthesis about, wind and hydroelectricity and blah, blah, blah. And at the end, I'm like, but you know what the lead was this day? François Legault shut the door to nuclear energy in Quebec. And it's really enlightening for them because, if you take tokens by the kilo, well, obviously nuclear energy wasn't important in the 30-minute scrums. And it wasn't even, he didn't pronounce the word nuclear. It was an answer to the question. And I'm like, this is where you see how your editorial judgment is important. And we dig a little bit further by carefully prompting something. So let's say you say to ChatGPT, I'm a reporter specialized in energy questions, and I want you to list every source of energy that François Legault talked about in his scrum. And then you will have a line, oh, by the way, he talked about nuclear energy. And if you know your business well, you'll be like, oh, it's new, it's interesting, I have a story. And a lot of people are like, oh, okay, so I shouldn't turn to ChatGPT just to summarize a scrum where I wasn't. Okay, first, interesting lesson. 2, you can interrogate the machine in different ways and have different results. And 3, your editorial judgment is key in this. So it's a fun exercise, I think.
I do too. One of them is turning Trump has had a press conference, for example. And so he's come on and do the usual. And I would have the students take those quotes and prompt them into a Seinfeld episode scene. And it's fun. The other one is visual. How would Salvador... What's the purpose of that? The purpose of that? When you do that, what is your well, how the robots can give you 6 or 7 lines of dialogue that could have been written by the writers of the Seinfeld in the same tone and everything, but the same visually. You can say in the style of Salvador Dali and Melting Clocks, how would Salvador Dali approach artificial intelligence and robots? And then you get the illustration. It's just to show them that whatever you prompt, if you, you know about Seinfeld episodes, you know the tone, you know the narrative. If you have that in your head, you can get this crane to give you a little scene that matches that, or that matches the style of Salvador Dali, so.
I have three quick ones. One is ID the error. So John McPhee used to have an exercise in his class called the literature of fact, where we would have to cut out a certain number of lines, right, in a magazine story, like greening. His class was called the literature of fact. And we had to green lines, right, which is the old term they used to use because you were cutting out the certain number of words. Similar kind of thing, but with AI. So you basically give the AI some information and you say, add in some errors, right? Change the language so it's more extreme or so it's biased. Add in a grammatical error here, or like you can give it all kinds of different errors that it could make, and it could be a short passage, it could be longer, and you basically you then print them out, and on paper students have to find the errors, right? Which is kind of just fun, and explain what they are. Another is.
But you're showing them that you have done that.
Yeah, you show. Well, then you show the original, right? And you identify like, okay, these were the errors, right? These were the things that were added. This was made more extreme, more violent, whatever. Language was changed to be, inaccurate, or a fact was added that was not actually true, right? So it teaches students to read carefully and think, and editorial judgment, that kind of stuff. Another one is the real and the artificial. So Toni Morrison original passage from one of her books, Song of Solomon, and then a passage that the AI is generating in the style of Toni Morrison, right? Or John McPhee, or whoever it is, and have them compare and guess which is, kind of like we did with Nikita's exercise, et cetera. But then beyond that, like, what is it about the style of Toni Morrison or John McPhee or whoever it is that the AI is trying to replicate? How can we characterize that? What is it that the AI is identifying as the core elements of this great writer's style that are the essence that the AI is trying to pick out, right? So we get into the conversation of like writing style and what does it mean to be of John McPhee style or Toni Morrison style. A third one is like a scavenger hunt. So in an hour, we're going to basically create a startup, a newsletter. It's going to be a very specific newsletter serving a niche community. And these are the 5 challenges you have as part of that. 1, a research plan. 1, understanding landscape around this subject. Another is explaining the product in detail, explaining the growth plan, right? How we're going to grow from 0 readers today to like 1,000 readers in 2 months, and then the revenue, monetization. And here are the 3 tools we're going to learn to use. One is Perplexity, et cetera. And here's ChatGPT with a custom GPT. And you have an hour, and you're going to use each of these tools, and you're going to, document your steps along the way in a small team. And in an hour, we're going to see, like, what does this team have? What does that team have? What does the third team have? And then we see, like, what the results are. How would you have done this differently? If you were doing this independently, how would that differ? What did you learn about these different tools? What did they do well? What didn't they do well? What are you going to do next time you do them? So there's a lot of different takeaways from that. It's collaboration. It's teamwork. It's jump-starting understanding those different aspects of the entrepreneurial process. So, and it's using AI as a collaborator and as an assistant in the learning process.
And one that you need to do if you have 100 students in a class is with languages. English, I mean, it was mentioned here today, English is the one language that we use. But if you speak in a different language, for example, I've had Arab students this semester, and we do the prompting. You're dealing with the Gaza, Israel situation. If the prompt is in English, you're going to get back the State Department version of events. If the prompt is in Arabic, because, the bots are gathering information that has been written in Arabic, which is more likely to be pro-Palestinian, it's different. Chinese students, very interested in the visuals. The word protest in a prompt will not yield any images. There's no protest in the Chinese visual bots. How about that? And it's, and then you get the biases, let's deal with nurses. All the nurses will be busty, blonde, blue-eyed, and beautiful. Women CEOs, the same thing. And so the graphic biases are there. The language that you speak to the bot will determine what you get back. And this is, for journalists, this is important. I mean, most of us are dealing with English, but you ask the question in a different language, and the material that is available in that language is going to yield a totally different answer. So journalists need to be aware of this and not just go with whatever the first reaction is from AI, because there might be another side there too. So that's an important exercise.
We had a question in the back. Okay, we'll go over here. Do we still have is somebody able to pass the microphone over? Do we have? Oh.
Okay, so you mentioned something interesting about the 2 languages. Earlier today, Alan mentions I won an award about the role of AI in reconciliation, and I have been investigating this story about asking ChatGPT about indigenous people history and culture, and what's the result? We all know the result. Then I play with ChatGPT, for example, to push it to say residential school is good. I reach to that point. Then within 10 minutes, I flip it to say it's bad. Then I went to the Arab language. I'm Arab, and I'm poet, so I'm very good in the language. In the Arab world, still they call the indigenous people the Red Indian. So when I ask it about the indigenous people of the North America, I have nothing there. But when I say, tell me the history about, I'm sorry, the Red Indian, I have information there. It is unpleasant, but I understand ChatGPT is collecting the information available on the internet. But you mentioned we shouldn't use it for a knowledge as a journalist. But if a student of history students or political science students or someone want to ask about what's going on in Gaza now and Israel, I don't know what's going on. So what's going on there? Why there is October 7, for example? Whether in English or in Arabic, ChatGPT will not give you the answer because there might be no answer on the internet. So the language things is very interesting, and just to say that.
Well, I do it with Spanish all the time. Being Cuban, I would say in English, I understand that the health system of Cuba is among the best in the world. If you ask that question in English, you get propaganda. If you ask in Spanish, where a lot of the Cubans have written differently, it's a different story. So there we go.
Just as we wrap things up here, I want each of you to answer, what is the one AI tool that has made your life easier as an educator, as a last question? Did you want to start, Jeremy? I know you write an entire newsletter, but I'm asking for one. People can subscribe to his newsletter. You'll learn about way more, but one.
Well, Nikita mentioned Oasis earlier today, and that actually is something, that and a couple of other tools that do a similar thing, like AudioPen, basically has been really helpful for me because it allows me to just talk out my ideas. And so that's certainly one. But I find the chat tools, particularly ChatGPT 4.0 at this point, to be super powerful because they're just so flexible. You can use them in so many different ways, so many custom GPTs, and you can iterate and use it for images for DALL-E 3, but just for so many different kinds of use cases. So it's kind of the versatile Swiss Army knife for me. A lot of other tools are great for specialist things, but it's the most versatile.
I'm a visual person. For me, Midjourney is it's what I play with every single day.
Well, you'd say I'm biased, but I would have given the same answer before that. Hugging Face is really a nice platform, and I was using it before joining it, I swear. And the second one, and it's closely related, is LangChain. LangChain is really useful. It's more programmatic. You really need to understand programmation, but it's really useful to orchestrate different AI tools together and to really steer in the direction you want. So it's interesting. And one thing I can mention, as teachers, as professors, and we are talking about, for example, biases in images. We will release a tool being able to, you can prompt something and have images with Midjourney or the model you choose, and it will analyze the biases visually. And so for teaching journalism, it could be very interesting, I think. So we can talk about it later. Yeah, we're really developing it like in the next few days.
Jeremy, Mario, Florent, thank you so much for taking the time to share what you're specifically doing in your classrooms and for sharing your insights about different ways to incorporate AI. Thank you.